Good morning, and thank you for coming this morning to an exciting symposium we have in store for you. It's really about a very important issue in workforce development and the city at large. It's really literally New York City's future. And it's just fantastic to see such a packed room, many familiar faces and new faces of different parts of the field that we're very excited to bring together to have this discussion. My name is Blake Foote, and I'm a proud board member of Center for an Urban Future. It consistently elevates salient policy issues. It brings attention to the practical ways to increase economic opportunity and justice for all New Yorkers. And really, since I came to New York City about 10 years ago to dive into the workforce development field here, I've been reading CUF's reports. I've been really focused on discussing what the recommendations mean in a lot of different circles, whether it's with funders, with government officials, with practitioners in the field. So it's really thrilling to see such a diverse group here today. We're happy to partner with Jobs First New York City to host this symposium on how to improve the city's youth workforce development system. The symposium builds on two recently released reports, hopefully which you've read or at least skimmed, that CUF released with Jobs First New York City. And this is really a unique opportunity today to hear from respected leaders from the private sector, which we don't always have on the front and center stage, which we're really thrilled to have, government officials, and community-based practitioners that are really in the trenches doing this work day to day. This is also a platform for us today to focus on solutions and new approaches to problems that I think we've all recognized for quite a while. And so what's exciting about today is that it really is solutions oriented, and I hope that many of you will stay to really get into these small groups and discuss how we can focus on those solutions. We'd like to thank, in particular, Robert Sterling Clark Foundation and the Ira W. DeCamp Foundation for their generous support of this work, really for several years, but in particular for these reports and the symposium. Now it's my pleasure to bring up the Center for an Urban Future's Executive Director, Jonathan Bowles. You're on.
Thanks, Blake. It is really a pleasure to have Blake on our board. The Center for an Urban Future has been publishing studies and doing research about workforce development really since our inception about 18 years ago. And to have someone like Blake on our board has been a really great source of advice and input and ideas for us. So it's really great for her to be a part of this event today. I also want to, like Blake, thank the DeCamp Foundation, Jonathan Horowitz, and also the Robert Sterling Clark Foundation and Laura Wolf for their generous support for the research that we did for the Bridging the Disconnect report and for this forum. I think it comes at a great time, also with the really valuable research that Jobs First and Lou Maselli and his team did with their report coming, I think, at a really interesting and important time for New York City. You know, at the Center for an Urban Future, we're not youth advocates. We are an independent think tank that publishes studies that are important to New York's future. We have a report coming out in a couple weeks about small business growth strategies. We just did a report about the importance of branch libraries to the city's future and community development. But I think anybody that's concerned about New York City's economic future has got to be alarmed about the level of youth unemployment in New York City. And I think that with our report, we really wanted to kind of take a close look at the landscape of what's working. And because there's a lot of things that are working, but what could be improved? Where is the room for improvement? And we're going to have the two authors of the Center for an Urban Future report, Christian Gonzalez Rivera, and Margaret Stix, the author of the Jobs First report, come up and very briefly talk a little bit about the two reports. I think they complement each other very nicely, and we're really hopeful that this event today is going to help kind of move the issue along because, you know, we're hearing so many really great things coming out of the administration, but I think that we want to make sure that addressing youth unemployment is really part of the strategy going forward. And again, it's really a pleasure to be partnering with Lou and Jobs First. And so let me turn it over to Lou, and thank you all for being here.
Morning. Most of you know me at Jobs First. You may have also known me in my previous role at Workforce Professionals Training Institute. And I give a shout out to that just because I think both reports also speak to the need to building field and capacity of staff in the field. And that's an important thing for us to consider. I also want to thank, we've got a lot of really terrific people here, and I think it is a reflection of a moment. And it's a moment that's not just specific to New York, of course, while all of us are centered with our efforts here in New York City. It's also a national moment. And we're really kind of humbled to have been building on our own work and complementing with work like Center for an Urban Future, which is just a terrific group, to really kind of bring this moment to light and to lift it up. Because I think it's not simply a question of, well, can we address the future of our workforce? It's also, can we address this moment with our young people in New York City right now to lift up their voices, to lift up their strength and their potential and their power. And I think it speaks to the kinds of people here, right? We've got private funders, including groups that are supporting our work and CUFs. We've got businesses, including a couple of folks from our Employer Leadership Council, which is really terrific. We've got members of both of these institutions' board of directors. You know, Blake gave a welcome. We've got Alan Momeyer here, who chairs the Jobs First board, and one of our panelists, John Toomey, today serves on our board. So we've got lots of high-level support and engagement from people like that. But then I think in terms of the policy influencers, the policy implementers, civic leadership, practitioners who are really grappling with these issues on the ground, we've got really the right kind of mix to have this moment be the right time for the right conversation about moving forward. There's a lot to be done, and there's a lot that hasn't gone well, but there's a lot that can be learned from what has not gone well also, and we can build on that. So we're thrilled to be here partnering with CUF on this, elevating this conversation. We're thrilled to be lifting up the work that both of our reports are really kind of shedding light on and giving some direction to. And we're really, really looking forward to taking some time with you to get direct input, to marshal all these ideas and resources to move us forward. So thank you. Welcome. I'm going to be doing some brief moderation for the two reports. And I think just in terms of chronology, so you understand on the schedule, I think there was an informal and pretty immediate agreement between CUF and Jobs First that when the CUF report was ready to come to light, that it looks at the previous administration for the current administration to raise questions for itself about what it can be doing. And so it both addresses what's not worked as well as what could be done in the future. And then our report really kind of lifts above and takes a look at both the national landscape and the local landscape and takes some of the solutions that we've learned in our early work at Jobs First, potential solutions and actual solutions that we can build on. So Christian Gonzalez, the author of the CUF report, is going to join us to present his high level first, and then Margaret's going to present as well, and we'll take some questions. So welcome, thank you, and let's dive right in.
So good morning, everybody. So we're all here because we know about the crisis that we have with our young people in New York City. We know that there's at least 172,000 young people between the age of 16 and 24 who are out of work and out of school. We know that there are double-digit unemployment rates with this population, and we know that they have a lower participation in the labor force than ever before. And so in light of these really alarming realities, what we wanted to do was study what is the city doing to respond to this crisis. And so as part of that, we looked at data from the major agencies that do this work, that fund this work, of course, the Department of Youth and Community Development, the Human Resource Administration, and the Department of Small Business Services. But importantly, we also talked to more than 60 leaders, practitioners, and experts like a lot of you in this room. And in fact, sort of looking around, I see a lot of people that I did talk to during the course of this report. So hopefully this report will really sort of express your voices and what you have told us. And so the main message really from you is that in general, New York City's youth workforce development system is really under-resourced. That existing programs are really only meeting a fraction of the need. And too many of the programs that do exist unfortunately are not quite doing enough to help young people connect to the labor market. And as an illustration of this, of the first piece, we noticed that on the under-resourced part, city expenditures have increased by 14.6%, yet expenditures at DYCD have actually declined by 15% in the same time. And though private funding has really bolstered youth programming in New York City, there's still not quite enough to meet the demand. And as an example of that as well, every year we turn away about 100,000 people from the largest youth program we have, SYEP. And basically, despite the demand, the acceptance rate for SYEP is only 27%, which means actually that it's actually harder to get into NYU as an undergrad than to get into SYEP. So it's really an illustration of that. And in particular, the two programs that we have available for disconnected youth, YAIP and OSY, only serve about 2,800 young people, which is a very, very, very small number, especially considering that how large the disconnected youth population actually is. And Ladders for Leaders, which is, of course, a program that's been very highly heralded, only served in 2013 a little under 300 people. So the numbers are really very small, and that's something we need to look at. The other major problem is that a lot of the programs are not always meeting the needs of young people. Young people are very diverse in their needs, and with thousands of young people with multiple barriers to employment, whether that's a lack of education credentials or unstable housing and health, a lack of soft skills. There's a lot of young people who really need a lot more before they can even be connected to employment. Yet, unfortunately, a lot of public funding streams tend to focus on sort of quick attachment to the labor force, as opposed to spending more resources in really helping young people reach those personal milestones. And this is especially true also for the largest program, SYEP. I mean, as a lot of you have said, that there's a lot more that can be done in that program, since it's the largest program, to really help young people connect to the labor force. And along those lines, I mean, one of the biggest flaws in the system that we heard over and over again is the lack of employer engagement. The employer voice is very, very much needed in these programs. Yet employer engagement is being done right now on an organization by organization basis. And there's not as much infrastructure as there should be on the city level to make sure that providers are getting that connection to employers. Another piece as well is that it's really a fractured system. We already saw the small number of young people that are being served by DYCD's programs. But in addition, 37% of the people who walk into a Workforce One Center are between the ages of 16 and 24. And in addition, 25% of the people who are enrolled in HRA's Back to Work program are also young people. So when you actually run the numbers, there's about 50,000 young people that are being served by Workforce One, and 20,000 in the Back to Work program. Yet, unfortunately, neither one of those programs, I mean, while they might work for young people who are a lot more job ready, they're not really always working for the young people who may need a little bit more help. The people who can really be served by the programs that you run, by the programs that are specifically for young people. Yet, at the same time, I mean, despite all the problems, there's a lot that does work in New York City. Some of our best programs depend on blended funding from public and private sources, which allows the flexibility to be able to do this work. Jobs First has also created a lot of great examples of good cooperation through Lesson, through Bond, and through the YASIP program. There's a sort of a very promising collaboration between OBT and the YMCA called Y Roads, which is another great example. And also we can learn from places outside of New York City. Boston, which is a city about a third of the size of New York City, engages about 900 employers every year to give internships to 3,000 young people that the employers pay for. So, I mean, they have very, very strong employer connections, and that's something we can learn from. In Philly, the Philadelphia Youth Network is an intermediary that's created a central place for private and public funding and also to coordinate programs. And in LA, there's a very promising program that depends on a very strong connection between the Unified School District and youth programs. So these are all things that we can learn from and then we can bring to New York City. But as far as recommendations, the Jobs First report is all about recommendations, so I'll give it over to them for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christiane. Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to see so many of you out here today. Oh, excuse me. So many on this very, very important issue. I'd like to start by talking about the scope of the problem. And we believe the problem is much more serious and broader. Who are the 35%? And in the last couple of decades, there's been a lot of focus on unemployed youth, previously called disconnected youth. But what we're learning is with changes in the economy and the loss of more than 150,000 middle-skilled, middle-wage jobs, we now have a very, very large segment of the population, numbering 15.2%. In addition to the 20% who are out of school and out of work, 15.2% are working in low-wage jobs with no possibility of advancement. And the reason I say that is because they're not in school. Most of them have limited education levels. And unless there's a major change in the workforce development system, they're going to be stuck in jobs like that for the rest of their lives. And what recent research is showing is that 35% is really the same population. The folks who are working in low-wage jobs are really cycling in and out. So if you capture them at any point in time, they are the 172,000 who are out of school. So we really need a comprehensive solution to a very large problem. And so what we're talking about is not just 172,000 young adults, it's really more like 305,000, and that's a scary figure. So a scary figure means a major look at solutions, and it means really a top-to-bottom look. It means not just looking at individual programs, but really thinking about an overall system that works for young adults and for the city as a whole. So that's what we've tried to do here. And the foundation of that system has to be employer demand. It has to be built on where the economy is, where the economy is going, what kind of jobs are going to be created, what are the demands for those jobs. And I think that's got to be the foundation that any young adult program has to work on. We have to think about where we want these young adults to be in 10 years and how they can support the economy. And we believe that there are a lot of opportunities to place young adults into demand occupations. And when we say demand occupations, we're talking about demand occupations that can lead to a middle wage, to $25,000 a year, which is the bare minimum that it takes to survive in the city. You know, family in the South Bronx actually needs to earn more than $41,000 to be self-supporting, a family with a single mom and one toddler. $41,000 a year. So minimum wage jobs are not going to get them there. So we have four major prongs. The first one is sectoral young adult employment partnerships. And these are collaborations among employers and training providers in specific industries that would identify entry-level job openings that lead to middle-income employment. And Jobs First has already pioneered a couple of initiatives that are doing that. So we know it can work. So it means identifying the openings and then aligning young adults with the skills they need to qualify for them. Along that line is sector-based training and apprenticeship programs. Tens of thousands of middle-wage jobs could be filled by young adults with employer-designed training, particularly leading to recognized certificates and licenses. These programs could be offered after hours at CTE schools, by CUNY, and by CBOs. And CUNY could be doing a great deal more in this regard. I mean, there are, I can name 5 major occupations off the top of my head that are not being offered by CUNY, but that training is not being offered by CUNY. So, you know, we know what some of them are. We could develop programs to meet that. Then for young adults who are missing basic literacy and numeracy skills, States like Washington have shown that basic education can be integrated with skills training so that young adults don't have to wait for years before starting their careers. We should also be preparing young adults for occupations in unionized industries. I think we all know that folks in unionized industries make more per hour than their peers in non-unionized industries. So this is a terrific opportunity for young adults. We need, okay. There are going to be 110,000 public sector government jobs opening up in the next 5 years due to retirements. And if you saw cranes today, there are going to be 37,000 provisional jobs because of recent litigation. So that's huge. That's a tremendous opportunity that young adults could fill and then move up into well-paying jobs. In the private sector, well-paid jobs in construction and property management will be available. The linchpin of our agenda is young adult opportunity centers. The need for these cannot be understated. 50% of unemployed young adults live in 18 communities in New York City. In Mott Haven, Hunts Point, for instance, 38% of 18 to 24-year-olds are unemployed. And we don't, and that's in addition to those who are in low-wage jobs. Because they don't know where to get help, help needs to come to them. Local-based opportunity centers could provide assessment and counseling and connect them to jobs, education, and training. They would be helped to develop educational plans and be provided the support they need to graduate and succeed in their jobs. Next, fourth, is a one-stop web portal. There's no single source of information in the city for a young adult who wants to get a job or pursue their education. You can go online, you're not going to find it. You can't find a central point where you can find, if you want to learn how to weld, how do you find that? There is no place. Or how much does a welder make? Or what are the opportunities? What does the labor market look like? We need a central portal that provides all the information that young adults need to make their career decisions. I'm almost done. I can hear you all thinking, how much is this going to cost? The short answer is a lot. But the payoff is huge, especially in comparison to the cost of inaction, in terms of lowered economic growth, heightened risk of homelessness, imprisonment and health problems, and increased government spending. The lifetime cost of not doing anything for the 35% is estimated at $300 billion. That's a cost we cannot afford. And I just want to say, respond to something that that Christiane said. I don't necessarily believe that the system is under-resourced. I don't know that we know that. We have a $1 billion system with 11 agencies administering workforce development funds. We don't know if these funds are being well spent and if they could be better allocated to achieve the goals we need. And I think that's the kind of study that needs to be undertaken. Thank you very much.
Okay. Keep your mic. These are the highlights, the headlines of both these reports, and we wanted to stop here and afford the room an opportunity to respond with any questions before we make our transition to the panel. So let me open it up to anyone who might have a question or a reaction to what they've just heard.
This question may be premature pending the panel, so if it is, it can wait, but interested in the articulation between the education system, the K-12 school system, and these various proposals for helping disconnected youth get jobs.
I don't know if either of you two have an immediate reaction to that. It is, it's a complicated issue because there's a little bit of a gray zone between what is traditionally referred to as the in-school system and then the second chance system. And I think there's opportunities there for, I
just want to say a lot of the issues that we're facing probably, who can quantify, but stem from the failure of the K through 12 system to prepare young adults for college and careers. In Mott Haven, for instance, that community I mentioned before, only 2.4% of 2013 graduates graduated college and career ready. So obviously there's a correlation between the level of unemployment and the fact that they can't hack it in college and career yet. So yes, we need really serious attention. We don't have specific recommendations, but something is going wrong.
Yeah, and along those lines as well, I think we can all agree that career exploration is one of the most important things that a young person can really be exposed to in order to prepare them for the workforce. And that's something that should really be starting as early as possible. So I mean, that's a clear avenue for collaboration between the education system and the workforce system.
Great. Other reactions, questions? I'm not going to respond to that question, although I'm awfully tempted, but I'll defer to our authors for any reaction. I think it's a great topic also for the panelists to consider as well.
You can go first if you like.
I mean, you'll see that that's the first recommendation in the Jobs First NYC policy agenda, is to build those relationships, because we think they're absolutely key to expanding the pool of jobs available to young people. So.
And of course, in New York City, we already have two major sort of sources of that connection between the mayor's office and employers. I mean, we have, of course, the WIB, and we have the new Office of Workforce Development. And one of the things that in my discussions with the people over in Boston, I think the quote was that she said, it's like, oh, Major Menino always, Major Menino of Boston, always said to employers and in any meeting, not whether you're going to hire young people, but how many young people are you going to hire this summer. So really having that that support really from the mayor directly, from the mayor's office directly, directing the WIB to make sure that they make these employer connections is really essential. I mean, really knowing that support comes from the top is really what it takes. Really that strong leadership.
Okay, have another question over here, and I'll get over here. I think you've just identified a topic for a future report. I don't mean to punt. I only respecting the content of the papers here, and I think you're raising a very thorny, difficult, complicated legal implication question that we all need to grapple with, and certainly it's fundamentally about business practices too, and how one influences them, and whether one should. And it's really a meaty question. So I think we want to keep that in mind as the day progresses. Let me take this last question, and then we'll transition.
This is just in response to the earlier question, Lou. As you mentioned earlier, we're sort of in an important point in time. And I know the Partnership for New York City had a meeting recently, Kathy Wilden invited a group of community as well as business leaders to talk specifically about this. And in response to my understanding, Chancellor Farina's interest in developing more CTE schools. So yes, I think, a lot of the private sector is very interested in this topic, and there's discussions. Hopefully there'll be more collaborations with city entities.
Great. All right. Thank you both, authors, for these reports, and you'll be having time to connect with them later for additional questions. We're going to transition now to the panel.
Excuse me, everyone. I just wanted to mention that there are now a couple of seats up front that the panelists were sitting in. I apologize that we don't have enough seats today. I really apologize. We didn't expect this turnout. Oh, and we are expanding the side over here to add a few more seats. So please do find a seat. There are a couple up front, one over here, and we're adding some in this side.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Hello?
I'm David Fisher. I am Senior Workforce Fellow at the Center for an Urban Future and Senior Policy Advisor at Jobs First New York City.
Hello, hello? Can you hear me? I think you just have to hold it close.
Okay, so basically I'm going to eat the microphone. Want to thank everybody for coming out this morning and joining in this important conversation. It feels like we have basically everybody in this room except the fire marshal. Just a couple words before we turn to the panel. As you heard from Lou and John and Blake in their introductory remarks, and Christiane and Margaret in their overviews, this is a complicated problem. It is a very serious problem with very ominous long-term implications for the city. It's been building for a long time. There are many causes. There are a few quick or easy solutions. It's insidious because we're conditioned to think that it's impossible to solve. And in a situation like that, the real enemies are inertia, the gravitational pull of the policy status quo, and indifference, because I think for most of us in this room, these are not our kids, and we don't live in the communities where the impact is most severely felt. I just want to thank all of you in this room for working to push back against those forces in your different roles, and hopefully this discussion that we're about to have will give you more ammunition for that work. So just to introduce our panelists, from right to left, we have Commissioner Bill Chang from the Department of Youth and Community Development, Roderick Jenkins from New York Community Trust, Paul Ortega from Swiss Post Solutions, John Toomey, a workforce consultant, and Angie Kamath of Perscolis. The first question, I guess, and this is for all the panelists, based on the reports that you read and for which I think most of you were interviewed, just what are your initial thoughts, the most important things that you read or heard, and I guess what you'd like to put on the table for our conversation today?
I think the two things that jumped out at me, one was collaboration. And I have to say, I was actually on a panel that Wagner had last week about issues of violence in public housing. And there's been a sea change. I mean, I was fortunate having worked for 10 years in the Bloomberg administration. There's truly been a sea change. There's a culture of collaboration. I kidded that DYC was never invited to anything before. Now we're invited to everything. And that's a good thing. I mean, one of the first commissioners I met with was the head of EDC, because I recognized the importance of engaging employers. And the second person I met with was the commissioner of SBS, because that's been the missing piece, I think, in a lot of the workforce programs, is the role of employers.
The numbers are not new. Is this thing on? The numbers aren't new. We've read them. You've seen them before. I think it's good that we put the numbers out there, that the report highlights solutions, possible ways in which we can address the issue. The notion of what can happen at the city level, the ideas that the reports mention in that regard are a bit of a blueprint for how we can move forward. That's my takeaway from this report.
I think there's a couple of things that are critical from a private sector's perspective, and one is how resources are used and allocated, and where they go, and setting clear benchmarks, because when you're dealing with human capital, sometimes setting a metrics that's not realistic in 12 weeks or 16 weeks is unrealistic when you're trying to change behaviors that were 16 to 25 years long. And so to me, that's the key thing that I really want to address and help guide and influence in any way possible.
First of all, let me say that because David is working with both organizations, he probably has the most to lose if this doesn't go well. I thought these were two excellent reports. And so this might sound a little like nitpicking, but I thought I was really struck by the Jobs First report by that Morrisanian number. You know, 2.1% of Black and Latino graduates were ready for careers or college. 2.1%. The city number, last I recently read, was 25%. Today's an article in the paper. The statewide number is 40%. I mean, so that's 6 out of 10 at best who are not ready. And, you know, nobody who ever ran a program thought there was enough money. And in the really good years, there was only enough for 5%. So there's never enough money. You have to figure out how to put the pieces together. But the shift from, with the federal WIOA funding from in-school to out-of-school, while there are many, many positives for that, you're also going to have those other numbers. And, you know, suddenly in 4 years, somebody will say, wait a minute, right? And I also thought, you know, following up on what Paul said, that I thought the Summer Youth Employment Program got a little short shrift in the Cuff report. It was never intended to get somebody from a 4th grade reading level to college ready. It was really designed in the years when there was more money to get 14 and 15-year-olds that were 92% of the program, first work experience, who's Uncle FICA, what are they stealing, where's my money? And it was to teach somebody that if you go to school 15 minutes late, nothing happens. If you go to work 15 minutes late, it's important, and you lose money. So I think, you know, it's a very complicated thing, but every time you move something, there's unintended consequences.
Does this work? Okay. Hi, good morning. So I guess my two reflections on the report. One is, I think the scale is very overwhelming for this problem, but I don't think that coming up with solutions is very overwhelming. And what I mean by that is I think the solutions are there. I think that we know where these people live. We know where they are. We know what systems they're slipping out of. We know what cracks they're falling through. So I don't think that we should lose sight of the fact that I think there's plenty of good programs and interventions out there. I think our problem as a community is in assuming that you do one or two things and you just sort of hope that that's going to work. And I think that I see that at Perscolis, but I think we can sort of see that across the board. The second reflection is just on work experience. And so I think work experience is incredibly important from the young adult perspective, from the adult perspective. I was on a panel with folks from Cornell Tech, and their master's students need work experience and internships. And so I think as the labor market gets more complex, as skills for every entry-level job, I think across the board get more complex, people just need work experience to try things out. And I think for young adults, I think there's an exploration piece, I think there's learning the workplace piece, but there's also just experience that's incredibly important. I think I'm just struck by that, and I think it's an interesting area to explore.
Thanks. So we now have 3 microphones for the 6 of us. So I think the way I suggest we work it is that the commissioner and I will share, Roderick and Paul will share, Angie and John will share. It'll be a nice metaphor for all of our work in this room where we have to collaborate and share. I wanted to ask another question of the whole panel. Working on both these reports, I mean, it really kind of struck me that the youth workforce system is a little bit like the joke about the bad restaurant, where the food is terrible and the portions are so small. Our parallel issue here is that there isn't nearly enough support to meet the demand. I mean, and we can see that just in the numbers that Christian presented, where you kind of compared the numbers that are served in the public system against the overall number of disconnected youth. And as the balance of both reports really got into, a lot of what is in place isn't necessarily best aligned to help young people get on track for steady employment and career success. So you have a quality problem and a scale problem. Which of the two should be fixed first? Is it even possible to fix one without the other?
I don't think it's an either or. I think you have to do both. On the resource issue, there are a couple of reports coming out in the next month. One is the Jobs for New Yorkers Task Force, which some of you have probably been part of focus groups, and it's looking seriously at the resource issue from what new resources do we need and how can we better spend resources. And then we've also been working with the Mayor's Fund to Advance New York City about how to approach the private sector about resources that we need to address issues that are currently not being addressed. For example, someone mentioned earlier about engaging young people in the workforce exploration process much earlier. Middle school is a great place to start. 7th and 8th graders have to make decisions about what high school they choose. It would help to have a sense of what they want to do in their careers. And right now there are no programs in place to do that. And as you know, the mayor just expanded the after-school programs for middle school kids, 271 new programs. So how do we build on what's already there without a great deal more money? So I think the quality issue I'll come back to because I think it's a lot more complicated.
I think we have to step back and I think there are models that exist. There are excellent models in Project Rise and city models that exist in the nonprofit world that have been created by private philanthropy. We need to understand how to redesign the system. I think that's the first step. I don't think we need to scale up. I think scale will come. We need to figure out what works and what needs to take place now to design a better system of funding, a better system that will support employer engagements, that will provide the resources for young people to make it through a workforce training program. I don't think we need to jump to scale at this point. I think we all know the problem. I mean, this is a quarter of a century in the making. There are lots of young people that have just simply vanished that were part of this. Number 10 years ago was 250,000, with 250,000. We got the 172. I don't know how we did that. But we have to step back. I think we need to figure out how to redesign the system, the youth workforce system. It's not the notion of where to put resources, immediate responses, more Band-Aids. I think it's really about trying to figure out what needs to happen and then take the bold steps now.
There's no question that I feel that both are needed. I think two things. If you can learn from our own organization and in the spirit of transparency, I'm going to share some things with you that I think we can all learn from. When we focus strictly on the dollar and numbers, we paid the price as an organization. And we paid the price because the recovery of that was huge. We're still recovering from that. When we focused on development and put our energies in the development of the young men and women, but more importantly in the development of the managers that were managing and leading those young men and women, our retentions and everything shifted. And when you look at the models of both reports and what we're discussing right now, they both address that from two different ends. And it's key, and I want to encourage you guys to really think about, we all need to think about the need and the goals that we're trying to achieve and the population we're dealing with. And just briefly, I was born at a time when typewriters were around and we had a regular phone, and we thought we were rich when we had the long extension cord in the house. The kids today are born at a time when they're dealing with smartphones. When the BlackBerry was just came out. I mean, I remember flip phones. There was a time when we used to talk about things such as, remember the last time we wrote a letter? My God, the kids today are talking about, remember the last time we wrote an email? You know, and those things, whether we realize it or not, like the typewriter, it fosters behaviors. It fosters behaviors like detail, focus, and so forth. When you look at the young men and women today, they're Control-Alt-Delete, cut and paste. And so those are behaviors that are fostered as well. So we're sometimes, going back to what was just mentioned, we do need to take a step back because we're thinking of, we have these young men and women that are coming through the doors, whether they're from a university or whether they're the young leaders that we're talking about today. They're coming through our doors as what I call short distance runners, and we're expecting them to be long distance runners, and we're not giving them the tools to be long distance runners. So.
I agree with Commissioner John. You know, you can't, I don't see one over the other, quality or getting to scale. But you can't fix either of them in 6 months, in a year, I'm not going to say you can fix it in a 4-year mayoral term, because I'm an optimist, but it's a long time to do it, and to get to scale, you certainly have to do that. But there are things that work. There are things over the years that have worked, and due to lack of investment, shift in priority, something we went away from, that could have done better. There are collaborations between libraries and CBOs and agencies or for other stuff that also can make a difference. And you know, New York, the number in New York, 172,000. You know, in the Cuff report, Christian did a really good job talking about the change that LA City did in order to go from 2,500 WIA participants to 20,000 between the city council, the mayor, the school system. There's a lot of that. We should be stealing good ideas from other people. But of the 305,000 number that Margaret talked about, the second biggest city in New York State with tremendous need is Buffalo. Buffalo's population, the entire city, is 258,000. So you can't turn a supertanker in a year, but I think there should be plans to improve quality and scale, and you're going to have to squeeze more leverage of other resources.
I think the two areas that are important to me in this kind of quality versus resource perspective is that we see a lot of folks who come to us who have been through 3, 4, 5 different programs that are all highly reputable, really great experiences. And so what I would say is we still, it's sort of similar to my comment before, I still think we have work to do about getting people onto a really strong track and making sure they stay on that track and are supported. I think that there's plenty of good programs where folks step on, but then it's just not for them. And it's, I think, important to put effort towards making sure that we are permanently getting folks onto a path and supporting them. The second piece around resources is I think the private sector has to put more skin in the game. And I think what I mean by that is we can't go to employers and say, you're a Fortune 500 company, you've got a huge balance sheet, you've made huge revenue, give me, you know, a 7-digit grant to focus on this. When we at Per Scholas work with corporate funders and corporations who are hiring our folks, we get a pittance for the first 1, 2, 3 years. We got to really prove ourselves, and then we get large investments to kind of help support our training and kind of support what we do. But we have to really engage the private sector in a very meaningful way, prove that we can work it, prove that we're worthy of that investment. And I do think that there's a lot of resources that we ought to be exploring in that realm. But again, it's not a free-for-all. We can't kind of go with hat in hand and expect to be taken seriously.
Thanks, everyone. I just want to quickly acknowledge a couple folks who've joined us this morning who have very important parts to play in this work. We have with us Katie Galstiggy, the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development, and Darren Block, the head of the Mayor's Fund to Advance New York City. Both these entities already have been referenced in remarks of the panelists, and I'm sure will be again. So thanks both of you for being with us. The next question I wanted to ask is primarily for, I think, Paul and Angie, although obviously everyone should feel welcome to chime in. What's been the experience of employers engaged with workforce programs serving youth and young adults? Based on what you've seen and heard, what changes would you recommend to draw more employers to participate and improve the experience for employers who are already at the table?
Our personal experience has been favorable. I strongly agree with Angie in regards to employers need to get more skin in the game. There's no question about that. I think the thing that's critically important that made it favorable for us is that the programs that we work with that are represented ironically in this very room are people that truly partner with us and really understand our culture. So they've invested into not just dropping their young men and women off to us, they're in the game with us. So there's a lot of guidance, there's a lot of support, they're well aware of the knowledge versus maybe programs or providers that don't. When you look at the corporate sector, it's important because they do what they do because that's what they know. They're driven off the bottom line. And so understanding that nature and trying to understand their language is going to help the provider to connect with them and connect with them in a way to draw them in and bring them in. Creating events like this that bring influential providers from different, or influential people from the private sector in each of the individual industries that have their own circle and their own network in those industries, I think is key. Educating them in regards to what these young leaders are about, because they're not disconnected youth, they're young leaders. And these are our future, and addressing them as such, and really thinking about how we market them, because I mean, that's critical. You're not going to see the universities or colleges out there talking about disconnected youth, and to be quite frank with you, and no offense to NYU, but there's more disconnected youth in the university system than are in any of the rooms that are being the kids that are represented here. And in a heartbeat, I would hire the kids, and our company would agree with this, I would hire the young men and women, these young leaders, from the programs that are represented here over someone from the university system, because they're taught things and they learn things along the way, such as values and so forth. I can go on with this, so I'm sorry.
So I'm very lucky because this is the second panel that I've been on with David in the past week. And I made a comment last week when we were talking about scaling sector programs, and I'll repeat it here. So I apologize for folks who are hearing this for the second time. But as the workforce development community engages employers, literally the three most irritating ways to engage employers are asking employers to participate in surveys, asking employers to sign letters of commitment to hire people, and asking employers to just hire, sort of put faith in the hands of organizations and just kind of straight up give them resources. And so what's important about engaging employers is that they're just part of the program. You don't have to be a fancy sector program to really understand and work with employers. All of our top employer partners are folks that are engaged in mentoring our students, folks who are engaged in offering career panels, folks who are engaged in hiring, folks who are engaged in the philanthropic side, just really looking at being on site like literally every day at Perscolas. And I think it's incredibly important to not just look at businesses as employers. It's too high stakes, and it doesn't really make that much sense. And so when I think about what the system can do to engage employers much more effectively, I think it's starting with kind of understanding the industry, getting kind of mentors and industry professionals, role models out there. The one piece that I would say that we hear constantly from our young adults is that they are lonely when they're in the workplace. They are the first person of color often hired in their department. They're probably the youngest. They're certainly the first one from the community that's kind of working in that environment. And it's really incredibly important that we support those folks and that they're spending a lot of time at that employer. And so that employer has to feel invested to support that person as well. And if we're only engaging our businesses as employers, as someone who's paying the paycheck of these young adults, we're missing an opportunity. And so I think we have to be much more holistic about how we engage employers. And I think if you can do that, a lot of really good things can flow from that.
Thanks. The next question, again, I guess is primarily for Roderick and John, but again, I would invite all the panelists to weigh in. Both the reports note that money alone won't solve the issues plaguing the system, but they also assert a real need for increased resources. In workforce programs for youth and young adults, as on the adult side, philanthropy has funded much of the most interesting and effective work over recent years. As the public system hopefully begins to shift toward a skill-building focus and a sector focus, what can philanthropy do? What should philanthropy be looking to do?
That's a loaded question. So,
True.
Did you bring the check?
Yeah, that's the thing. One thing you learn in this business is not to say things that are going to generate applications. So, at panels. So, What can philanthropy do? Wow. I think we should, I'm going to be very vague here. No.
Compellingly vague.
Compellingly vague, yeah. So what can we do? I think what we're doing now, I think this administration's reached out to philanthropy, reached out to the trust and other funders about trying to figure out how to redesign the system. I think that the city's read this report in many ways. I think they're using it as a blueprint. There's some great ideas on the table. I think that they've got great goals for how to incorporate work skills and workforce training, maybe perhaps redesign the system. Philanthropy needs to be at the table, work. I think we've worked very closely with the city in the past under the Bloomberg administration and during the early first year of this administration. Katie Gall-Stagel, SBS. These are all collaborations. That's what philanthropy can do. That's where we value the most. I think we're, for lack of a better word, partners in this.
I'd probably answer that question a lot differently in any location but New York City, because you're so fortunate to have a philanthropic community that has really actively engaged and increased their funding over the years to $65 million last year. I mean, that doesn't happen it doesn't happen anywhere else in the country. Boston says it does, but that's inaccurate. So I think that what the philanthropic money has really done is provided glue money and experimentation money, which is critical, because you don't have all the pieces. You have, those of you who operate a program, you get something, government money that does some good, but it's limited by performance standards, smart people in Congress who never ran a program did, or limited eligibility or different eligibility for a bunch of programs. In terms of the promise of sector work, I think the promise is tremendous, but we're still nationally scratching the surface. I was fortunate to do a fun project looking at recommendations from the Re-envisioning the New York City Workforce System report. And because I have friends who run city programs all over the country, I get to find out some really neat stuff that happened. But everybody in sector, every city, started with healthcare, right? Defined career pathways, very defined. If you get this credential, you can move up. And many areas went into advanced manufacturing next, particularly if they were an area that still had a lot of manufacturing. And now they're all struggling with IT. And an eye-opener for me was a meeting that was held at Philanthropy New York a couple of months ago, where Fred Diedrich from the National Fund for Workforce Solutions talked about the need to have somebody dig out where these jobs really are. And for those of you who were there, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he said the University of Pennsylvania, Penn itself, had 6,000 IT jobs. But nobody knew what the 6,000 were. They were totally administered by separate departments in a very big university. And they were called different things, and it took a full-time paid staff person to dig it out.
I mean, the one observation I would make as somebody who's been on both sides, both in government and in the nonprofit sector, it's an observation I've seen throughout whatever I've done, is that philanthropy can innovate. What government can do is it can replicate. And so the best example I can think of is the BON, the Bronx Opportunity Network, is a great example of where there was a collaboration between community colleges and nonprofits. And so as we redesign our workforce investment program, or Workforce Innovative Opportunity Act programs, yeah, it just doesn't roll off the tongue, then we can look at examples like BON as ways, and a lot of that is about geography. You had a cluster of good workforce development groups, a cluster of community colleges willing to work in a relatively close geographical area. So earlier today, I spoke to someone from LaGuardia Community College and told them to reach out to the Coalition for Queens, which is trying to create a whole tech sector in Long Island City. I mean, to the extent we can look at the geography of where the assets are on the ground. And so that, to me, was the big lesson I got from the BON initiative, which was funded with private dollars.
Sort of a follow-up to that question, Commissioner Chung mentioned WIOA. both at the federal level with the new law and locally with the Jobs for New Yorkers task force, the emerging emphasis really seems to be on collaboration and partnership across agencies and across provider organizations. And the Cuff report also, I think, highlighted some emerging examples, mostly supported with private dollars in the field, often under the guidance of Jobs First, the Bronx Opportunity Network, which the Commissioner just mentioned, Lower East Side Employment Network, the Y Roads collaboration between Opportunities for a Better Tomorrow and YMCA, and I'd also mention the Young Adult Sectoral Employment Project, which Perscolis is involved with, and a lot of other organizations and funders in this room have had a hand in. With all these things kind of emerging and showing the, showing the potential to really move the field, what's the next step? What can government do to begin to get these things to scale? And again, what is the potential role of other stakeholders, philanthropy, the private sector, employers, to really begin to make some of these things not like an attractive side dish, but really the main course of the system?
I can speak to what DYCD is starting, but I think a lot of things will be coming out in the next few months with the Jobs for New Yorkers Task Force and the Mayor's Fund to Advance New York reports. But even before those efforts were underway, we started the conversations with CUNY to figure out how we can better align the out-of-school youth programs with the community colleges and some of the occupational programs, whether it's phlebotomist or EMT. I mean, not every young person is going to go to a four-year college. How can they enter the workforce with the skill that is needed? On the in-school youth side, we started conversations very early on with the career and technical education schools, because we knew, again, not every young person is going to be in college. Not every young person can afford college. And how can we have them enter the workforce in a meaningful job that pays well, that, again, the alignment with the educational system is a big focus for our workforce programs, because it starts there. I mean, if they don't do their job well, and if we don't figure out how we can connect to what they're doing, we really can't have meaningful and positive outcomes for young people.
I don't know if I should pass this to John.
No, you're going to do it?
Yeah, I'm going to let John answer this question. I'm not going to.
Roderick figures I'm semi-retired. I can't really get fired. And I'm the principal of my consulting firm, and I like what I'm doing. So let me say this. I was so happy after years of every time they come out with an 800-page federal bill and having to read it with 5 yellow highlighters to send it out to people that never became law. I was so happy when WIOA started to move along not to have to do that. But it doesn't work. It's like The Godfather where they draw you back in. I did some work for Council on Law and Social Policy, and I had to really go through the bill. And it's exciting what you can do that you couldn't do before. I mean, that part of it is a real big plus, and there's partnership. And Congress is so dysfunctional now that these bills only put into statute what's already been proven to work, career pathways, sectoral work. I'm less sanguine on the money side of it, because I don't think the fact that the appropriators said, here are higher targets every year, that in the next few years we're going to get there. There's still a deficit. And what bothers me a little bit every single day is that somehow the youth employment issues and the entry-level jobs that I could have gotten as a kid and worked my way up have disappeared, and it's not seen as a crisis, right? I mean, the country has no money. So we decide we have to do something in Syria and Iraq. We spend $10 billion in the first week. That's 3 years' worth of the biggest workforce program in the country. I'm not saying don't do it. I lost a lot of friends in 9/11. But I'm just saying we need to do a better job. It's a crisis on every level of government. But earlier today, the panelists talked about industry engagement. The best possibility for better industry engagement, to me, is sectoral initiatives. And it follows with the 7 pages of the partnerships, New York City partnerships, program about employer input into what we really need training for.
What I would add is really applaud the city's efforts to establish intermediaries or industry partnerships. And so we're very excited about the tech talent pipeline and NIACH as well in the healthcare field. And so that type of work should be continued and supported and I think really added to. The other piece that I would say that government and philanthropy can help out in is, to be very blunt, the handoffs between our programs are really sloppy. And I can't underscore that enough. And so, you know, whether it's the fact that as a small nonprofit, we have to, at a very retail level, go high school by high school to try to engage guidance counselor by guidance counselor to attract their folks who are not college bound to kind of consider per scholas. It's really inefficient. And so to the extent that government can help with those types of handoffs, I mean, I could give many, many examples of where those handoffs are again, just really sloppy. We are starting a bridge program for literacy for folks who are high school graduates, but who can't evidence a 10th grade level of reading and math. And so we're creating a program with FEGS to take those folks who are awfully close, give them the right literacy prep to then get them to the starting point of per scholas. I think there are also probably bridge programs that need to be created to get folks from internships into full-time work. Again, that's another huge sloppy drop-off point between so many programs that we see in the field. And so I think real concerted efforts to understand these transition points that young adults sort of very naturally face that are fine, but to expect that a young adult is going to kind of, you know, make the huge leap from a program to, or from, let's say, from high school to a program to an internship to a full-time job by themselves doesn't make sense. And I'm preaching to the choir because I think most folks in this room who work with young adults know that. And that's a really right place for, I think, investment and some exploration.
I'm going to exercise my moderator prerogative and just make a comment response to that because I think it is such an important point. We often talk about the sort of tangible gaps, you know, that face this population: lower educational attainment, fewer opportunities to access experiences that most of us take for granted in terms of internships and things like that. I think that the social capital and system navigation aspect of this is such a crucial, underappreciated point. You know, we hear a lot about what happens when a lot of these young people beat the odds and get to college. They kind of don't know what to do. They don't know even what they don't know, how to access advisement resources, how to go talk with a professor, how to look into financial aid. So I mean, you know, Angie's points are always fantastic, and I was very glad that she said the thing earlier about the ways not to work with employers. I actually think that would be, you know, not that you need more work to do, but I think that would be a wonderful op-ed for somebody to write in the circles in which all of us move. But to me, the social capital and system navigation point is just crucial and probably an area that's long overdue for additional emphasis. So a question, I guess, again, for everybody, but I would particularly like to hear Paul and the commissioner weigh in on this. Is there a right balance in workforce programs for youth and young adults between a focus on education and a focus on work readiness or career exploration? And I guess to revisit something that the commissioner referred to a few minutes ago, what is the appropriate role for the K-12 education system in doing this work?
I mean, I think one of the things we've learned at DYCD over the years is that the best programs are the ones that marry youth development with workforce development. I mean, you have to understand where a young person is at any given point in his or her life. So you talk about the Summer Youth Employment Program. The age range is 14 to 24. That's a big age range, and young people are at different points in the spectrum there. So a 14-year-old, it's about just career awareness, learning the skills about, someone talked about, you know, the consequences of not showing up on time. All those things are important. I mean, at a 14-year-old is not going to know what they want to do in their career. I mean, how many of you knew what you were going to do at 14 and are doing that now? How many of you remember 14? Oh, okay. One person remembered 14. I mean, yeah. I mean, when I was 14, I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer because Neil Armstrong, for those of you who don't know, first man who landed on the moon. 2 years earlier, I said, that's it. I wanted to build rockets, right? At 15, I didn't want to be an aeronautical engineer because I hated math. So I think, you know, a 14, 15-year-old is obviously at a very different place than a 17, 18, 19-year-old. And so we want to grow programs like Ladders for Leaders. I mean, it's not even necessarily money. Yeah, money would help. Money would allow us to have more providers, do better job development, but it's employer engagement there because the key to Ladders for Leaders is employers willing to hire these young people. It's no lottery. We put them through a boot camp. And it actually was the result of a conversation we had with Kathy Wild 8 years ago, where we were trying to convince her to hire more young people in SYP. And she said, I don't want to hire somebody who's picked through a lottery. She had a good point. They invest a lot in these summer jobs. And so we designed Ladders for Leaders as sort of a more program for older youth, high school juniors, seniors, and first year in college. Young people have already made some choices or decisions about what kind of career they want to go into and put them out in the workforce. So I think you know, that's sort of the key, the right balance, I think, is understanding where young people are at.
I definitely would agree with that. I think a good example of that is we talk a lot about hard skill, and what we forget about is it's soft skill that supports the hard skill. And the soft skills are needed. Again, going back to what I mentioned earlier about these young men and women, the terminology they use is LOL. And the interns and the staff that come through our doors in our training, I look at them and I say, if you ever write that to me, I will just... And I make them write it out because I want to know that they know how to spell out laugh, and they spell out and loud. And so when they get emails from me, I literally text that whole thing out. But I say this because it's critical, because so many times they don't have sense of privacy. Their definition of privacy is different than ours. And so understanding how technology is used and how they communicate is critically important. So you can't force a circle into a square. And so what we had to do as an organization is learn their language. And when I used to sit there, I was beating my head against the wall trying to tell them, okay, we're going to outline, we're going to do some outlines, we're going to write, ... And then the minute I shifted over and said to them, we're doing weekly video journals, oh my God. It was a night and day difference. And the tools that we were able to create using these video journals have been just amazing. And it's a great way for caseworkers to be able to use, and having these young men and women do weekly video journals of what they learned through the week, teaching them the skills in regards to how to articulate, how to communicate in the way that we're communicating now. That's instrumental. And it's needed for these young men and women to hold those jobs. Tapping into the organizations that we have, the resources such as what Jobs First offers for, and WPTI offers for all of the providers that are here in this room. Shifting our culture to understanding that we're a development culture, and that we need to really fine-tune our own craft in order to really tap into what the capabilities are of these young men and women. I think that's key, and something that we need to really address.
You know, fixing K-12 is such a huge task, and there are plenty of really smart people and a lot of money behind it, Gates Foundation, Lumina, a lot of things. But if you don't improve the results of K-12, business would call that rework. I mean, if 3 out of 4 New York City high school graduates are really not ready for college or a career, or the extra, or don't have the basic skills to get the certifications that would get them a good paying job and start them on their way, that's one side of the problem. But somebody who is an early dropout that has a 5th grade reading level, it's going to take a while to get them up to the point where they can profit from this new economy. And I think that that's a challenge that many of you in this room have your ideas how to do. You know, I had a conversation with Ray Winefsky before we started today. There's a lot of these things are not new, you know. I mean, a lot of these are not new. You know, good providers years ago said under Job Training Partnership Act, you couldn't succeed under the performance of those programs unless you came in with a 7th grade reading level. What about the thousands of kids, hundreds of thousands in New York City who had a 4th grade reading level? So we got together. The last year, Koch ran successfully, 1985. We got a $7.5 million investment that lasted about 5 years to get people from 4th grade up to there, you know, called CityWorks. And so sometimes, you know, things fall back, champions move, and it's time to look at it again. But there are certain steps that you need to do to get people up there. You need interim goals moving people forward to self-sufficiency.
So I have a few more questions, but I just wanted to get a sense from the room. How many of you have questions that you would like to ask our panel? Just a show of hands, please. Okay, I'm going to do one more, and then we will turn to the audience. And a question for all of you. Realistically, what would success or even really tangible progress in this area look like 5 or 6 years from now? What outcomes should policymakers and funders really attempt to push the system toward between now and then?
I think it comes down to employer engagement for DYCD. So we've set out a goal which I expect to be in the Jobs for New Yorkers Task Force report, and we actually started planning this back in February. We want to expand the number of private sector work sites in our summer youth employment program to increase it from 30% to 55% by the summer of 2017. And there's a lot of research behind this. A major university, which I can't name because they haven't released the study yet, but they did the first longitudinal study of summer youth employment program. And one of the key findings was, and they had IRS data, so one of the big findings was that there was a clear correlation between the first SYEP placement and what career choices they made. Now that's very powerful, and that really speaks to the kind of job placements we have. Summer camps are important. I understand the after-school providers will kill me if I said no to after-school programs, but you know, we have to place young people in places where they don't have traditional access to, whether it's government jobs, whether it's in the private sector, because many of the young people we work with come from communities, low-income communities. The only jobs they know are the jobs their parents might have, their neighbors might have. And so I think the issue of employer engagement, expanding the opportunities and career awareness opportunities for young people is how I would want to measure success for one of our largest programs.
I think we're going to see some good ideas and recommendations from the Jobs for New York Task Force report. I think if you were to look forward, we would completely rework the system in 5 years from now. All of the youth employment dollars that exist now would be under one department for youth workforce. This department would engage employers and have responsibility for helping introduce organizations or work with providers or work with workforce training programs to introduce them to employers. The summer youth employment program might be year-round if you were to look forward. The placements would be significantly more important than, and I don't want Michelle or anybody to get mad, than sitting next to a door to watch and make sure that the young people don't get out during a day program, a day camp. This is a huge opportunity, this SYP program. This is huge. And we need to look to Boston for ideas. We need to look to Detroit. We need to look to other cities to see what they're doing. Granted, some of these cities are much smaller. Detroit's a one sector town. But the relationship between employers and the community college system and the schools is much more cohesive. These are models. We need to redesign the system. We need to focus the resources and push the notion of what employers can do, of the role of employers in helping young people decide. If you talk about K to 12, that's a really big goal, right? I think a lot of this is happening now. I think we're doing a lot more. CTE schools need to have a greater focus on the types of two-year certificates or two-year degrees, at least. I don't think you can eliminate college. I don't think that that's a goal. I don't think the goal should be just to go to college. I think that the goal should be to meet the young person where they are. If they decide that they want to be in a certificate program, if they want to work, then we need to help them understand what it means. You can't get into this. In this economy, you can't get a job without going to school at some level, some college, a two-year certificate at the minimum. Just graduating from high school and trying to get work, that's not going to happen. We're not going to be successful. So the notion of education, and I think that's important. I'll leave it at that.
Success to me is that we move out of a siloed way of thinking and environment, all of us as a culture, and really push for being more collaborative together with events like this. And I'm going to use from a provider standpoint, visiting each other, going to different providers to learn from each other, tapping into the expertise and learning what works. I think that's key. tapping into the resources that are provided and really maximizing those resources. I'm going to give you a quick example of a program that we, as an organization, we inherited legacy employees, and 6 years ago, we identified 2 senior employees that had a non-reading level, and it was identified when I asked them to sign something and they put an X. And through working with those 2 men, it was very easy for us to just release them. We could have very easily have done that. And, but they were in those positions when we inherited them for 10, 15 years. And they did something right to be able to hold those positions for that long, not being able to read. And it would frustrate us because emails would go out and they would never respond. Well, that's why. And so we partnered and, again, collaborated and partnered with organizations like OBT at the time. And when I went to OBT and explained to them the situation, we stuck these gentlemen into a reading class. And they're with us today. And both read easily at a 9th grade level. And I think that's huge. And to me, that's collaboration. That's really tapping into resources. Working with the resources that are given to us, such as through, again, like Jobs First, what they offer, with WPTI and what they offer, but really honing in on those things and really capitalizing on them. That is success to me. And coming to you guys and saying, here's what our needs are, and how can you help us out? What could we do to help you out? ... And really, that's success to me. And I hope that we're there in 5 or 6 years. I hope it doesn't take that long.
You know, following up on what Paul said, there was a study that came out a couple of years ago. It's only been out twice, National Assessment of Adult Literacy Skills. And there's 5 levels of skills. If you're a parent, you don't want your kids in level 1. Level 1 is basically totally illiterate or functionally illiterate. You're either totally illiterate or maybe you can read 1 sentence, but you can't balance a checkbook, can't go from point A to point B on a map. And for the country, 22% of workers are in level 1. In a high-tech economy, that's a disaster and that's a waste of human capital. For New York State, we're 49th out of 50 states. Undiagnosed or diagnosed disabilities, early dropout. You may or may not be literate in your native language, but you're not in English. Queens is in the worst, I mean, if you know, and that, I don't know how you, that's probably not the way to say it. Of the highest level in level 1 in the country, there's 5 counties. Queens is in the top 5, 46%. Unless you can read and have lifelong learning as your job changes, you're not going to get anywhere. And we've woefully underinvested in the SOL for people that want it and need it. I think that the Jobs for New Yorkers Task Force report, the re-envisioning the workforce for New York City, these 2 reports provide a direction you may want to move in. But it's going to take a lot of research. It's going to have to, you're going to have to help providers who are doing a wonderful job in today's paradigm to make that shift, because you don't want to start building it up again from nothing. And I think that WPTI is going to have a big role, because you're going to have to show people how to do it. And I know my own provider background, if I think this is somebody's new idea and then eventually 2 years they'll take another job, I might rope-a-dope. But if you bring in somebody from Boston or LA or Detroit and they really did it and it worked for your people, you're more likely to do it. So find those people.
So I have a blue sky answer and a specific example, the specific answer to this question. My blue sky answer is that at the end of the day, our young adults need networks and access to opportunity. And so 5, 6 years, I would love to see a citywide mentoring program for 100,000 young adults to be connected with an industry professional in the area of their interest who can really help give them that leg up, that access to opportunity, the referral to a job, support when they fall down. I think something like that is incredibly critical, and I feel like I could almost guarantee if we had that level of industry professionals engaged in the public system, jobs would come, money and resources would come, and I think industry engagement would be would be profoundly different than it is today. I think that's something that I would love to explore with anyone interested. My more specific response is Margaret shared really troubling stats earlier, and I work in Mott Haven. So 97.2% of our young adults in Mott Haven aren't going to be graduating from college. And I think what we need to hold ourselves accountable to in the next, in 6 to 7 years is someone has to feel like that's a problem and someone has to own that problem, right? And so a high school that graduates that person and says, my job's done, I can move on to the next. That's a problem when that person drops out or graduates or enters college but doesn't finish. We don't have a system right now that cares about anyone who falls out of those systems. And based on those facts, 97.2% of folks are falling out of those systems. And so we need much stronger accountability and a way to make sure that the thousands, hundreds of thousands, well, tens of thousands of folks who are falling out of that system have access to networks and opportunity.
Thanks. So we're going to turn to some audience questions, but first I wanted to give Katie Galstiggy an opportunity to say a couple words and maybe, I guess, share a reflection on what we've heard here this morning.
Thank you so much. Well, first I want to thank New York Jobs First and Center for an Urban Future for putting this together. This is so important, and these two reports are really critical to all the work. I also want to thank the panelists for their time and their input. We certainly heard a lot about the upcoming report. Our expectations are high, as they should be, but we also want to realize that this is what we're doing with the Jobs for New Yorkers Task Force is trying to take a look at, to borrow the other report's title, reimagining our workforce system. So we do want to take a look specifically at what can we do with our government resources and how can we better invest them. And a lot of the ideas here are ones that we've heard from our members and from our focus groups, a lot of which you have been a part of. So thank you. I also just want to say that a little bit about my office, which is the new Mayor's Office of Workforce Development. We are committed very seriously to these connections, very seriously to making the difference between education and workforce a smaller gap. You know, we've talked about K through 12. This administration, as you know, is even invested in pre-K. And we're interested in not just 12, but 9 to 14 schools. So these lines are getting blurred with our investments. And that's what I want us to see, and that's what I hope to see in 5 or 6 years, is more of a continuum, more lines being blurred, and you can see this administration's investment in those kinds of you know, before K, after 12, and where we see workforce development all throughout. So I'm sure I'll have an opportunity to speak to all of you soon about the report, and I want to thank Commissioner Chong and Angie, who are members of our task force, as well as many advisors who are sitting up here. John, of course, a dedicated advisor of ours. And so I want to thank you. And if you guys have further comments or questions or want to make sure that we're putting anything in, please contact myself or Alyssa, who's here, Alyssa Weiss, who's here on my team as well. So thank you so much for this informative panel.
Thanks. Questions from the room? Michelle.
Hi. First, of course, I just want to echo what Katie just said, to really applaud these two reports. I think they are just really pivotal and critically important for us at what's a very important time to build further from what we have. I also want to say how pleased I was to see, in particular from John and also some of the other panelists, comments about the Summer Youth Employment Program. That sort of was my one concern, is the sort of framing of SYEP as larger part of an ideal system than it really ever should be, and putting more weight on its shoulders than it ever should be asked to bear. Really, to totally misuse the metaphor of the ladder and ladder to leadership. It's a rung on what should really be the ideal ladder, and some of what is really core to where the reports are driving us is to look at what are the weak rungs that we have in the ladder. What are some other strong rungs that we partially have in the ladder that we can build down, and what are some really completely missing rungs from the ladder. And speaking from the perspective of Good Shepherd Services, where we're just now really beginning to look at wanting to build out our workforce development work for young adults, what I'd really most like to know is, how can we take this conversation further and have a table to really help providers like Good Shepherd who want to help build forward to really be able to do that in the most efficient and effective way, rather than kind of going back to our offices and cooking something up on our own, and to be able to kind of really have that collaboration that you're talking about. Before you answer that question, I want to just make one reflection, because I know there are a lot of folks from the administration in the room and other critical colleagues and from philanthropy, et cetera. And I feel like there's an opportunity in some of the expansion of low-income housing and the housing developments and sort of repurposing of the community centers and NYCHA facilities, for example, to potentially build out, build from Margaret's idea that she spoke about of the young adult opportunity centers. I'd love to see us look at how can we take advantage of those opportunities, in the housing developments as an opportunity for the developer to get the tax credits, but you need a provider like a Good Shepherd who's willing to take responsibility for operating a center. This would be such a wonderful usage of that. I'd also separately love us to pursue how we might be able to do that. But back to my question is there a way for us to create a table so that we can smartly move forward to build out some of those rungs?
I think the table exists. Jobs First New York City is probably the linchpin, right? That's the connecting. I think Jobs First holds a number of events that can help the nonprofit sector begin to think about how to engage employers and where what their role might be in the workforce development system. I think that's probably the start, and I think that if there are other places where we can expand, I think it'll come from that intermediary. It's probably a good starting.
Other thoughts?
I would just add, I sort of endorse the Jobs First piece as a member of the Young Adult Sector Employment Project. That's been an incredible experience. For us, Per Scholas came to that table because we were really viewed ourselves as an adult program, and yet we saw and see a lot of young adults, and so we wanted to make sure that we were getting it right for both populations that we serve. Most of the other folks in the room, though, are actually not dissimilar from Good Shepherd in that they have some workforce programs where they really wanted to kind of get it right in terms of a sector focus. So I think there's more, and it's really probably Lou's domain to talk about that, but that's been a really interesting project and one that we should probably figure out how to continue to share those learnings with the community and create those opportunities for others to join in, because right now I think it's limited to the 6 or 7 organizations.
I just want to make a short comment. I thought one of the profound observations in Christian's report is that if you're paid on performance, you don't share openings and you don't have some collaboration stuff. And so some of what Jobs First done with the Lower East Side Network, talking to David Garza earlier today, was in collaborating, the sum of the pieces was more than they were individually. And I think that that's something that probably needs to be fostered. How do you leverage out more out of the community, the providers, and all the resources that exist?
Other questions? Ma'am.
So very interesting conversation that we're having here. I would like to hear more, this is open for anyone, but specifically Angie and Paul, about, you both have touched upon skin in the game. And I thought that was really interesting because that's thinking if the game is inherently equal. When we look at the 35% of the disconnected youth, they overwhelmingly share a similar race and socioeconomic status. So when we look at employers, I think employers are, many of them are inherently discriminatory and don't have the conscious lens to understand how am I going to sustain and retain a first-generational college student in my corporation. They don't so I know you want to take a holistical approach. Other than surveys and what else did you say? The letters of commitment. What are other ways to engage employers that aren't, let's give them the benefit of the doubt that they are not intentionally discriminatory, but how do you engage, bridge those gaps?
Can I start off? Yeah. There's a few things I would do. One, I would take the courage to do a complete needs assessment on your individual program. Start there. As an organization, when we took the courage to look at ourselves in the mirror to figure out what was going wrong, because it's very easy for us to be able to say as an employer, well, it's your fault that this employee didn't work. And when the day is over, we had to stop ourselves and say, okay, what was our contribution to this? What did we not do? Kind of thing. And once we did that, things shifted and things changed. With that being said, we started to put more development in our managers, and we had to be honest with ourselves in regards to what could our managers manage, what was in their ability. So you might have a phenomenal person that would just hit it out of the park, and we might say to you, I don't have someone to manage that skill set, and I don't want to lose that person. So I don't want to force that circle in a square kind of thing. So listening to the actual need of the employer, I think, is going to be really critical, and trusting in what they know. Understanding the fact in our culture today, there are very few organizations in corporate America that actually have a training department. Swiss Post is an anomaly. We are not, I mean, I'm fortunate enough that we're in an organization where we have a training department, we have trainers, but keep in mind that each of our trainers, and one of them here is our Director of Human Resources is here, and we play dual roles, and we're part of the bottom line in order to hold those roles. So we were smart enough to really take those into effect. Going back into your world, don't be afraid of sharing with us, with an employer, here are the areas that we're struggling with, that we're working on, and point it out and present it to them, not where it's fear. And when you're talking to the employer about your talent, talk to them about leaders, because that's really what they are. These are young leaders. I think that's critical. Do you want to?
So I remembered my trifecta of the 3 most annoying things. I forgot one of them. Employer advisory groups, letters of commitment, and surveys. Those are the things you shouldn't do. Here's what I think has been instructive for us, and it very much, I'll maybe just give some specific examples which very much concur with Paul's comments. So for the young adult sector employment project, you just got to find one employer who has a pain point. And from there, just figure out what that problem is and solve for it. And so I'll give you a couple of examples from the young adult sector employment project. So Montefiore Hospital, huge hospital system, kind of gobbling up lots of and growing in a really great way in the Upper Bronx. And so they have lots of openings, and they really want folks from the Bronx who are local, who want to serve their community. That's Montefiore's pain point, and they're willing to work with local organizations to kind of help develop people, and they recognize that it might be extra effort, but they really care about a Bronx workforce. The Bronx Zoo, 700 seasonal workers, and they realize it's really taxing to hire 700 people every year and then kind of go back to the well, and so they're willing, as an employer, to do something smart. Cypress Hills is working with Maggie's Transit. This is a transportation paratransit company that literally has like 25% retention, and like every 3 months they turn over, which is ridiculous, right? And so at that point, you could be black, orange, green, purple, it doesn't matter. That's a problem that the employer has. From Priscolis' standpoint, we're working with a company called Doran Jones, who basically, for software testing, they're finding that they have to hire art histories and economic majors who aren't computer scientists. They'll take, that's the software testing is like the lowest rung that college grads will often enter. And the second they can jump over to a programming or development job, they will jump ship. And so their pain point was retention and kind of having people who really cared about being a software tester as kind of a long-term career goal. And so they came to us and said, we want to help train your students. We will hire them. They're going to give us a revenue share that's going to be very significant to our bottom line, because that was the pain point. So there's a lot of research about kind of what good sector work does. There's a lot of talk about labor market information, but quite frankly, I'd say start with one employer, find a real problem that needs solving, and the fact that our students, the folks that we care about, the 172,000, are the ones to fit the bill. It doesn't matter what background has come from, and we walk away from employers all the time who aren't interested in supporting our students in the ways that we know they need. And so I think you also have to have the courage to walk away from some employers that just aren't getting it. But I think there's lots of employers out there that have problems that need solving.
I think two global observations. One is one of the refreshing things about the Jobs for New Yorkers task force is that major employers are part of the process. IBM, for example. So I think the more enlightened employers understand that if the workforce system doesn't work, it hurts their bottom line because they need to be able to hire mostly workers from New York. So it's in their best interest to do that. So there are clearly self-interest, big thinking employers. I think the city has to create incentives and carrots to get people involved. So in the executive order signed by the mayor last week on the living wage, one of the exemptions, which I think was highlighted in the New York Times column this week, was that an employer can be exempted from the requirement if they engage in the workforce system sponsored by the city. So that's a carrot. So I think there are different ways the city can use its economic levers, whether it's in the procurement process. The Department of Citywide Administrative Services procures hundreds of millions of dollars in supplies. Can we consider the possibility of, again, using that as a carrot? The Economic Development Corporation spends hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies. Again, another carrot. So I think there are ways. We want people to be willing partners. Sometimes you need a little incentive.
I just want to add one more thing real quick. Once you land that partnership with whoever that is, whoever you decide that person is for you, nurture that relationship. Because what we tend to do as a business in our own world, and so suppose we would woo the client. I mean, just like any other relationship, here come the candy, here come the flowers, and then the honeymoon is over. Right? Okay? And I say that because, and we lost business after a while when that relationship after the 8-year mark or 6-year mark or 4-year mark wasn't nurtured anymore. And it's not about just giving an award or acknowledgement to people. Or to those, I mean, not to say that there aren't egos, there are. But it's not about that. It's about literally just being in the game, understanding what they're about, and because they evolve as well. So really understanding that need and really nurturing that relationship.
Thanks. We got time for one more question. Ma'am?
Hi, my name is Jane Delcer from Center 4. We're an initiative of FEGS to help health and human service providers transform service delivery through technology. And I felt that this was a question I had to ask, given that the population we're serving are technophiles and are short distance runners. I really like that example. So what are some opportunities of specific technologies or uses to address these problems or to underpin the solutions around collaboration or information sharing or better engaging this population?
This is something that we just added, just so you know. I didn't know that there were apps out there to help kids how to find a mentor. There's actually a mentoring app. I have it downloaded on my phone right now. There's actually maps that are designed strictly for interns. And you can go into, so utilizing their world, but do your homework on those apps because sometimes they don't always have all the information that you need. There's an app in regards to, not to plug Simply Hired, but it's called simplyhired.com, and you can go in there and it'll literally give a detailed outline of next steps of what they need to do. Did you do your homework? Did you investigate what this company is about? It literally outlines it for them so they can check it off. So it's a great way of teaching them in regards to technology, how to use the technology that's given to them in the correct way as opposed to simply just being on Facebook or ...
You know, Woody Allen said 90% of life is just showing up. So last week I'm in Washington at a meeting of workforce directors of cities, 70 cities represented. And I'm sitting next to a guy I know a long time, Clyde McQueen, Kansas City, Missouri. Clyde is a wheeler dealer. So in the course of the conversation, he says Ford is basically staking the future of their company on a new aluminum-bodied F-150 pickup truck. It's the largest selling vehicle in the United States, 32 years in a row. They're going to switch to aluminum. It's going to be 700 pounds lighter, and they're going to have better fuel economy than any of their competition. So they're building the truck in Kansas City, Missouri, where Clyde is. They had to hire and train 10,000 people. Now, Clyde runs the workforce board there, and he's got many, many sources of money. He was able to get 6,000 of his people hired And I said, how did you do it? They had to pass reading and math at a certain level. Reading, the math is easier. You can teach people algebra tricks and get them to that level. But reading is really hard. And I'm not endorsing the products. I haven't looked at it enough yet. But he said they used something called Career Ready 101, and it was phenomenal. People that hadn't worked in 2 years, returning offender, were able to get this phenomenal rate where they get 60% of the placement. So I think, earlier I should have said one thing I think philanthropy can do is help people see what is out there, what certifications, a dropout could get an Excel and some other certifications that, with metrics learning, other products that are in the libraries that many of you don't know about could be done. And the last thing I'll say, and I'll get off the soapbox, I think too many of the projects are good projects in isolation. And I'm guilty of that. I did something for the Queens Library System last year where they wanted a uniform job search curriculum for 62 branches, many of which are in really distressed neighborhoods. And of course, I immediately jumped to get Vista money, translate it into Mandarin, translate it into Korean, translate it into Spanish, get it on the website, and partner with CBOs who have a coach in a computer lab to help people get better skills.
Please join me in thanking the panel for what I think has been an excellent conversation.
I'd also like to thank all the panel, and usually at the end of these things, someone like me comes up and says, "I wish we could keep talking," but the good news is we can today, and we're going to have a 15-minute coffee break, and then please stick around because the way we have these tables set up here today is we're going to actually have some strategy groups where we're going to be discussing some of the specific issues that came up during this discussion and really kind of try to get towards solutions. So please do stick around. I think it's going to be interesting. Lou Maselli is going to lead the strategy groups. Also, I forgot to mention earlier, a big thank you for NYU for hosting us today. And again, thanks to all the panelists and to David, the moderator. Thank you.